Hello, everybody. We've had a lot of rain here where I'm at. I'm kind of grateful today the sun is out. I need the sun. I know we need the rain, but too much overcast skies and rainy days affects me a bit. So I'm grateful for the sun today. So I've been reflecting. As you get to know me, you'll realize that I tend to do that a lot. I'm an introverted sort, so um, that inward reflection is my place of comfort, I suppose. I like to live there a lot. You got to be careful about that. Rumination and overthinking isn't necessarily healthy. Speaking of our health and well-being, I've been talking about the difficulties in dealing with some of the more toxic people that may be in our world, in our life, in our families, and our workspaces and communities. It's not so difficult to recognize overt types of toxicity and abuse. Those things are things we can typically acknowledge for the most part, right? Those more covert forms of toxic behavior, the more covert forms of abuse are maybe a little bit more challenging to identify. So often it has become normalized. There are many normalized forms of toxicity in our culture, in our school systems, in our institutions, in our country. But just because it's been normalized doesn't make it acceptable or okay. There's large corporations that operate unethically and, quite frankly, illegally. If you're starting up your own business and you seek to model after them, you may find yourself in unethical practices, illegal practices. Just because it's become the norm doesn't make it all right and doesn't mean that we don't need to challenge and change it. We need to do that within ourselves as well. Everything starts with self, does it not? So, like I said, we talk about toxicity in other people, but we have to look at our own toxic traits as well. That's not always easy. Some of the more covert toxicity and damaging things that go on, like I said, is normalized, and we don't like to look at it and see it within ourselves. But if we can see it in our external world, it does exist in some shape, form, or fashion within ourselves. It's not a comfortable thing to acknowledge, is it? If you tend to think of yourself as a good person, are there things within yourself that you're not acknowledging? This is a question I don't just ask of you, I ask it of myself. I have to do that quite continuously. If you grew up in very toxic, abusive dynamics in your family, is it possible that we've learned to embody or we've been conditioned to have some of those traits within ourselves? I think it's important that we ask that question, that we evaluate it, that we look at it. I been through therapy in and out my life for different reasons. With a particular therapist, we were having to look at some of the relationships I was choosing. why I was choosing them, the abuse that I was unaware of. In an effort to assist me in that, she recommended a book. I'm going to recommend it here to those who are open. If you don't recognize abuse and what it looks like, this can be very helpful. Like I said, if you've grown up and abuse is normalized, toxicity is normalized, then you may not recognize it. Like I said, the book called Unsafe People. I read the book and it was very illuminating and helpful. Not easy to read. There were some traits of unsafe people that I embodied. Wasn't a comfortable thing to look at. I had to be able to recognize it and to begin to change it. People are neither good nor bad. I've said this before. Not sure if I said it here, but people are neither good nor bad. People are people. It's the actions and the things that we choose to do habitually that we deem to be good or bad. But be careful about that. Good and bad are relative terms, and like I said, they're relative. I like to think of it in terms of, does it serve me? Does it serve me, and does it serve those around me? Does it serve our greater world? Is it helpful or is it harmful? There are people who choose to take actions that serve the greater good, that serve themselves, but also serve the greater good. And that is their pattern overall. Does that mean that that person hasn't ever chosen poor methods? Has never made a choice that did not serve them and serve their greater world? I would suggest not. We all have the potential within us to make choices that go either way. There are those who have a pattern of choosing harmful, damaging behaviors and actions toward others. I want us to be careful about taking a hard road of judgment against those people. Now, it doesn't mean that once you become aware that somebody chooses predominantly toxic behaviors, that you entertain them in your world and keep them in your space and stay in relationship with them. I'm not suggesting that at all. But what I am suggesting is that you be able to look at those things with compassion and empathy. Hurt people hurt people. Most people who take such damaging roles in their lives come from deep trauma. Their backgrounds are deeply traumatic. The same background and upbringing that breeds the narcissistic person is the same dynamics that breed the codependent. We don't demonize the codependent or tell them it's their fault for some of the trauma that they may endure because of their codependent tendencies. But codependency is toxic. Narcissists are quite codependent at their core, and every codependent has some narcissistic tendencies. We tend to phrase, it's become very popular for us to use narcissist as a term as a application to people who have done hurtful behaviors. But diagnostically, not everybody that has harmful behaviors would be labeled as a narcissist. But I say we have to be careful about our judgments. They're relative, first of all. And also, the thing that we judge externally, if it does exist in us, we're going to have a hard time acknowledging and forgiving it and changing it because we're in judgment of it. If we judge something as bad, it's not typically something we want to see in ourselves. But if it does exist in you in any shape, form, or fashion, you're going to have a hard time acknowledging it, forgiving it, changing it, and doing something different because you can't change what you won't acknowledge. So when we're looking at things, we need to look at things. And it all starts with self. Are there things within ourselves that we need to address and change? If we have inherent biases and we won't look at them, can't look at them, we're not going to be able to change it. It's going to serve to disconnect us from others. It's going to disconnect us from self. I think it's important that we look at it. Like I said, when we're talking about oppressed people, if you're years, generations of oppression, there are some patterns that happen to oppressed people. We see alcoholism and abuse and a lot of things show up in communities that have had generations of oppression. Not all of those things are healthy. A lot of them are toxic dynamics. Does it make you bad? No, it does not. These were survival mechanisms that developed. They were important to survive. But as we move forward and we seek to create a different world, we're going to have to look at those things. One of the easiest ways to do that is to look at the judgments we hold against others and ourselves. I've been watching a lot of people rise up, and we're at a crossroads. We can choose to begin to heal, or we can perpetuate the cycle. We are not breaking generational patterns by going from being an oppressed people to becoming oppressors. We have to begin to look at the things that we're not comfortable in. Self-love, self-forgiveness, love of another, forgiveness of another. And like I said, not everybody's on a path where they're willing to change and grow, to let those things go. They're not there yet. Is there a time when maybe you weren't there in some aspect or area of your life? Like I said, we have to be able to look at it. If we're judging it and hating it, and we're going to have a hard time changing it because we won't be able to look at it within ourselves. These are all important patterns. Like I said, reading that book, Unsafe People, was very difficult. And don't get me wrong, there was a lot of things that didn't apply to me. Those weren't things I did. But there were toxic traits within myself that I had to look at. Am I always a healthy person? Well, if I believe that, well, I won't be able to deal with some of the toxic traits within myself and begin to change them and heal them. I won't be able to do it. We have to be able to look within, look at our own inherent biases, recognize why they're there, think about whether it truly serves us. And remember, just because it's been normalized does not mean it's healthy or that it serves ourselves or our greater community. We have to be able to look at it. I love you. Have a great day.